So welcome to the Arts Lunch at United Theological Seminary. I'm Jennifer Oz Freeman, the Assistant Professor and Program Director of Theology and the Arts here at United. And we're really excited to have with us Suzanne Roberts, a local art historian, who's going to be talking us today about AfriCOBRA. I'm really excited to learn more together and have some conversation and look at some fabulous images. Exciting. So without further ado, Suzanne, I'll just hand it over to you. If you want to say more about yourself and your work, you're in control of the time. Thanks.
I think that's probably sufficient. I'm an independent art historian, semi-retired, and today we're going to look at the legacy of AfriCOBRA and what AfriCOBRA was about, and spend a lot of time with the work of Bisa Butler. It looks as though she is just burst onto the art scene, but actually she's been working at it for a long time. We'll start out with what AfriCOBRA means. It's African Commune of Bad Relevant Artists. That should give you a hint. It's what we're into. In 1968, a group of young professional artists, and they were educators as well as part of the group, seek to keep some of the energy from working on the Black Wall of Respect project that was just completed. And so they got together to see what they could do about creating a new art aesthetic that would be aimed at African-American peoples. One of the things that I like to do in these sessions is put a lot of the stuff on the slides. So while I'm talking about it, people can see what I'm saying and have more of a visual record of it. The works of AfriCOBRA were created according to several principles: free symmetry, rhythmic syncopation, shine, meaning the luminosity, dynamic contrast of color and spatial relationships, and jam-packed, jelly-tight composition, meaning they fill the whole surface of a canvas. Along with some awesome imagery and what they called Kool-Aid colors, they also integrated text into their visual message. And they often sought to reference our history as Africans as opposed to African Americans, and look at Africanness across the diaspora. Larry Neal was a playwright and poet. He's the one that coined the term Black art movement. And so when he talks about these artists, he said they attempted to stretch and extend the use of color across the full spectrum. And he's equating it to how Coltrane did jazz in terms of squeezing a multiplicity of tonal patterns out of every note. And he believed, they all believed that art could be an instrument of change and that all art was political. At first there were 5 founding artists, and then when they started their exhibitions, they were joined by several other artists. Sometimes people get confused because they also had an art history forum called Confaba. And Confaba, there are like maybe 100 artists that belong to Confaba, but there are much fewer artists that were a part of AfriCOBRA. Now, these are the founding members of AfriCOBRA. And so these are the primary people that we're going to be talking about today. And Jeff Donaldson and Wadsworth Gerald were probably the de facto leaders of AfriCOBRA. And they're important not only from an AfriCOBRA standpoint, but they were the 2 people who were Bisa Butler's instructors at Howard University. And this is a poster from AfriCOBRA 1, 2, and 3. You'll notice that it's just a sheet. Part of what they wanted to do as artists is make art accessible to people of color and to people along the socioeconomic spectrum. So in reproducing their work, they wanted to produce work on paper, and this concept came indirectly from Elizabeth Catlett, who's working in Mexico at the Taller de Grafica. And it's the same strategy that they used at the Taller. And the Taller had both artists that you probably heard of, like Orozco and Rivera and Securis, but a lot of other politically active artists that were working in Mexico. The Black Wall of Respect was the first collective street mural in the country. And it was a montage of portraits that are historically popular heroes in the Black community. It created the model for community engagement in mural making, and it would become the standard across the country. That's why the project was so important. It inspired a nationwide explosion of mural making, and over 1,500 murals were created across the country, with hundreds being created in Chicago alone. The Wall of Respect mural was destroyed in 1971 when the mural caught on fire, when the building caught on fire that the mural was painted on. The thing that they learned about the community engagement was that people value something when they're a part of the process. That's the primary thing that they learned. Because while all of these artists were in Chicago, they weren't necessarily a part of the community. Jeff Donaldson was teaching at Northwestern. All the artists at one time or another either were attending or went to the Art Institute of Chicago. So what they learned is that they were warned that they were doing this mural in the middle of what was called the ghetto on 43rd and Langley. But what they learned about that experience is that people take ownership if they're part of the process. And it sounds simple today, but usually people would want to drop something into a community and then they didn't understand why it was defaced. In this instance, since the community was part of developing the mural, even the gangs like the Blackstone Rangers vowed to protect the mural, which was highly unusual. This is what it looked like. And this is part of, they had tremendous national coverage of a mural that was created in the middle of the ghetto. But while they were working on it, people would just come and watch, and in amazement, something was created for the community, and they relished in it. Jeff Donaldson working on the wall. This is partially finished wall, and you can see the people kind of gathered around just watching the artist's work. This is Barbara Jones-Hogu. It's one of the artists working on it. And Jeff Donaldson in the straw hat is engaging a lot of the community people as they watch the artist's work. And I wanted to show you this picture more like how it was painted on the wall. It's a tribute to people who were part of Motown and popular music. And then this picture of this young man being engaged in what was happening with the mural. Now let's talk about Jeff Donaldson. Jeff Donaldson created the manifesto for AfriCOBRA. And what Jeff Donaldson is is famous for a couple of things. He, as I mentioned before, was teaching and working on his PhD while he was doing the Black Wall of Respect. He was the first African-American to receive a PhD in African-American art and art history. It was in this time period, and actually later on, when I went to school, it's almost impossible at most schools to get an art history concentration based on African-American art. The oddity is that you had to attend usually a Ivy League school or some school like that to have a concentration in African-American art, which let out a lot of African-Americans who may have wanted to pursue that. He started what was called the Organization of Black American Culture. That was a predecessor, and that's the organization that people joined when they wanted to work on the Wall of Respect. And after that, he co-founded AfriCOBRA along with Wadsworth, Gerald, and the other artists. He's credited with creating what was called a trans-African style, and that's just kind of looking at all the contributions of Africans across the diaspora and looking to get characteristics of a style that would relate to Africans across the diaspora. He began teaching at Howard University in the fall of 1970. He would eventually become the Dean of Arts, the Humanities Department. He was also director of the World Black and African Festival Culture in Lagos, Nigeria, 1979 to 1980, and he was also head of the North American Committee for FESTAC's Second World and African Festival. It was the largest Pan-African cultural event ever held. One of the things they used to do is, of course, hold regular meetings, and Wadsworth Gerald had a studio, and they would meet at the studio, and this is one of their meetings. Now, let's get to Jam Pack Jelly Tight, which is the beginning slide here. And there's a lot going on here. You can see the Kool-Aid colors. You can see the syncopation of rhythm. Also what's embedded in here, this is a jazz, I think it's a jazz trio. If you look in the upper right-hand corner, you can see just a very faint figure blended into the pattern of the background of a woman singing with a microphone that goes down. At the very bottom, it really is a piano, and you can see someone playing the keys. The keys is the design at the bottom of this piece. And then over to the right, you can see someone on a horn. So it looks like just a beautiful surface design, but there's all this embedded character development inside of all of the pattern. And the surface is totally filled. This is another Wives of Shango. Shango was the god of lightning in Yoruba religion. And the women wear the bandoliers with the bullets in them that says that they're armed and ready for whatever the future may bring. Some detail. Notice the coloration of the subjects. And this is Wadsworth and Jae Jarrell today. I think this was taken during the Soul of a Nation tour, which is probably why there's been a tremendous interest in the work of AfriCOBRA today. And one of the things that the Tate did when they organized that show, and I'm talking about the Tate Modern in England, which is anomaly, something that's strange within itself. This is American art. This exhibition was the largest exhibition of African American work put together since David Driscoll's exhibition in 1976. But it had to be done by a museum that's in London. Now, eventually it toured the United States to rave reviews and huge crowds, but it was organized in England and it came here. And it's that exhibit that triggered all of the interest in AfriCOBRA today. Wadsworth Gerald was born in Albany, Georgia, where his father was a furniture maker and a farmer, and he was expected to help with the business. Later on, after high school, he joined the Army. He served briefly in Korea. He became the company artist. After the Army, he moved to Chicago, and he attended the Art Institute of Chicago, originally become an illustrator. He was a founding member of AfriCOBRA, as I've mentioned before, and helped to create their aesthetic. He taught at Howard University, as well as the University of Georgia, until he retired. And he was one of the main contributors to the engagement process for the Black Wall of Respect. And he was also an attendee at FESTAC, and he used that opportunity to travel within Africa. He currently lives and works in Cleveland. Now, this is some of his early work prior to AfriCOBRA. He was experimenting with color and how to use it in a composition. This is probably one of his most famous pieces, called Revolutionary. The original of this piece is owned by the Brooklyn Museum, but MIA, Minneapolis Institute of Art, also has a serigraph of this particular piece. And what you notice about this piece is the text that's embedded in the design of the piece. And here's Black Prince. It's the same kind of principle. Next to it, you'll see a detail on the right side. You see his eyes in the text that's embedded within how he's created his facial features. Jae Jarrell is his wife. She's a fashion designer. They both attended the Art Institute of Chicago, but I don't think they were there at the same time. But they met. They worked on the wall together, and then they were married. They both joined AfriCOBRA because they were fascinated with Jeff Donaldson's manifesto. And her most famous piece, A Revolutionary Suit, was her favorite because it got appropriated by the mainstream fashion industry. And there was an article about it in Jet. Here you see it on a model in 1971, and Jae Jarrell recreated it for the Soul of the Nation show. And this one's the Urban Wall suit. She created a suit that took some of the elements from the Wall of Respect. And this particular piece, Unite, this is a very famous piece from the 60s. You may have seen it. Barbara Jones, her specialty was printmaking. Here she is in her print studio. And here's one of her works, Relate to Your Heritage. She is the one that, here's Elizabeth Catlett. Elizabeth Catlett was also a big influence on Bisa Butler because of the way that she supported the redefinition of women in the artistic movement, and what she had to go through in terms of her existence as an artist outside of the United States. Here's one of her works, Homage to My Young Black Sisters, 1968. And Malcolm X speaks for us. I think Mia also has a copy of this. Gerald Williams, who was the youngest of the participants. Here is his work, Wake Up, 1971. Now, as I mentioned, Bisa was also influenced by other people. There's Romare Bearden's Mecklenburg Morning, and he has a whole Mecklenburg series, and you notice all of the bright colors and the way he uses color in this particular series. That's what she was most influenced by. Also, Jacob Lawrence, you also don't think of Jacob Lawrence in terms of the way that he was using color, but that's something that she saw, Bisa saw in terms of how he created scenes. Now let's get to Miss Bisa. Her full name, which she never goes by, but I thought I would include it here, Mailissa Yamba Bisa Butler, born in 1973. And this is her artist statement. I hope people will view my work and see the expressions of joy and vibrancy of the colors and the quiet dignity of my portraits. All of the figures are done to life scale to invite the viewer to engage in dialogue. Most figures look like viewers directly. Figures look viewers directly in the eyes. I am inviting a reimagining of a contemporary dialogue about age-old issues, still problematic in our culture, through the comforting medium of the quilt. Let's talk about it. She was born in Orange, New Jersey, to a father of Ghanaian descent and a mother from New Orleans, whose father was a diplomat. And both parents were educators. I know her mother was a French teacher. Her father was a college administrator. When she was 4, she won a blue ribbon in a sidewalk contest. She's always said her parents made her feel like she was the best artist in the world. She remembers always sitting next to her mother and her grandmother watching them sew and quilt. She attended Howard University as an undergraduate, first for architecture, which she found she hated, and switched to painting. And she attributes the influence of AfriCOBRA instructors, Jeff Donaldson and Wadsworth Gerald, with her choice to use jewel tone colors instead of a representative palette. She went to a college in New Jersey, Montclair College, and she was actually, her master's degree is in art education. And, but they had to take all of these foundational courses. Now she graduated in painting from Howard. At Montclair, she had to take a fiber arts class. And in that fiber arts class, she found that she could resolve a lot of the problems she had with painting through fabric. And then she began to create her first works. And now during the same time, she was married, she had small children, and she didn't want to use paint during this time, so that kind of spurred her on. She started teaching in public school. She taught in public school for 13 years, and she didn't quit teaching until 2017 to devote herself full time to her art. Now she uses vintage photos for inspiration, both those of her family and others. The Art Institute of Chicago, what that ARTIC stands for, says Butler depicts African-American life in a way that invites viewers to deeply consider the lives and the aspects of her subjects. She identifies as a fiber artist, textile artist, sometimes say they're textile artists, other specifically talk about themselves as fiber artists. She is married and continues to live and work in New Jersey. Let's talk a little bit about her process. As I mentioned before, she's inspired by historical events and vintage photographs. From that, she develops a narrative for the piece. And every person in a particular scene has a story. She's concerned with history, and she seeks to recreate a positive image of African-American culture and to generate optimism for the future. Her quilts capture a moment in time, much like photography does, but she always changes something when she uses a photograph as a reference point. She leans not only on African-American history, but African history as well. And she likes to look at different signposts in history. When she's evaluating a subject, most of the subjects, other than her family members, are strangers to her, and usually they haven't been identified in the photos that she's using. So she imagines a history for them. She takes note of the time and the place where the photo was taken, and she totally reimagines a background story for each of her characters. She makes detailed sketches and a color textile plan. She collects fabric. She also gets fabric from multiple wholesale retail outlets. Also, her grandmother and her mother also gave her fabric, and she likes interacting with different other fiber artists. People will experiment with fabric and send her the fabric. And like most portrait artists, the subject's gaze is very important. She already said in her artist statement, she likes her subjects to look, their gaze to look directly in the eyes of the viewer. After she finishes all of these plans, the sketches, the textile plans, then she's ready to cut and layer the pieces. It can take 2 hours for her to layer pieces. And she procures the fabric. I told you about the vendors, and then she can pin then she can pin the things. Depending on the size, it can take her from 500 to 1,800 hours to complete a quilt. I have a short film about her. Can everybody hear it?
My name is Bisa Butler, and I'm an artist who uses textiles to create quilted artworks. I would say that I was an artist from the very beginning. I was the kid who was always coloring, drawing, scribbling, just like all the other preschoolers. The only difference was that when the other kids ran off to do other things, I still continued to draw. My mother's side is African American, and they're from New Orleans, Louisiana. And my father's side is from Ghana, West Africa. And I was raised in New Jersey. So that combination of like these different cultures all coming together in one household, it influenced me in a way that I was surrounded by art all the time. I was an art major at Howard University, and Howard University had a strong influence on my outlook on art. It informed me because there was a really strong tradition. There was one thing to teach your students how to construct a painting, how to compose an interesting composition, but how do you define an African American culture? And what is it that separates us but makes us stronger and better? My professors were part of a group called AfriCOBRA, and most of them came from the AfriCOBRA tradition. They even went so far as to throw out the paint palette that you would use. It was called the Beaux-Arts, or the European arts tradition, using white to lighten your artwork. That was unacceptable. So we were all like, what is this? Like, that was just a total flipping of ideas. We even had assignments where usually when you start a painting, your canvas is white. You think about a white canvas. We had assignments where the canvas was black, and now you paint on that. Like, so they wanted to sort of flip that and say, literally, this is a colored and black sensibility. And the palette that we used were colors that you would see more in African art or in African fabric. Bright orange, bright yellow, crimson red, intense blue. And that color palette was called the Kool-Aid colors. And the Kool-Aid, yes, they were African colors, but there was always like that acknowledgement that this is an African American thing and this is a new thing. And that affects me a lot to this day. I'm not doing it on purpose, but when you look at my art, you're going to see, you know, those Kool-Aid colors still. You're going to see that bright crimson red and vermilion yellow and azul blue. Like, you're going to see these intense shades. And those are the colors that I'm drawn to this day. One of the founders of AfriCOBRA was Jeff Donaldson, who was the Dean of Fine Arts at Howard. So he's taking his AfriCOBRA sensibility and bringing it directly into fine arts. As the Dean, you're the one who sets the mission. And part of that mission was like, you have a responsibility to educate your people. You have a responsibility to have your people always be shown in a positive light. I still maintain that I never want my artwork to show my people in a bad light. We are people who've come a long way. We do struggle still. There's still a lot of social ills that are affecting my people. So I want to address that, but I also don't want this paternalistic view like, oh, poor them. I'm not interested in that. I'm more interested in seeing, look what we can do. Now that I'm working full-time, I meet a lot of other full-time artists, and I see that how much of a responsibility you have as an artist. You are the reflection of our times. So whether you're a writer, a dancer, filmmaker, painter, sculptor, you're reflecting the times that you live in. And after you're gone, that all that is left is that reflection.
Okay, Bisa doesn't paint anymore. These are some of her early works, but she often shows these at lectures to show people that she was layering even when she was painting. Also, before I forget, Bisa is having her first major museum solo show at the Art Institute of Chicago. It will be showing through September 6th. I'll be going. And so if you have an opportunity to go to Chicago this summer to see it, it's a great opportunity to see her work. In addition, they also will have the Obama portraits there this summer. So it's a good opportunity to see not only Bisa's work, but those portraits as well. This is some of her early work. 2002, she never got to meet her grandfather, nor was there any photos of him, so she did an imagining of him. This is one of her first pieces, and she's trying to work through issues around shading and contrast. And this other work, Day's work, was done in 2005. And she's beginning to work through some of those issues that she has. Malcolm in 2012 and Basquiat in 2015. And she's still working through stuff. She's teaching school, so she's only working on issues on her quilting part-time. You'll notice these are fairly small pieces. Her work now is huge. Some of the pieces can be as large as 9 feet by 12 feet. And these were smaller sizes, more like 2 feet by 3 feet. Now, she says that this particular photo was one of those moments of change for her. Russell Lee was one of the photographers for the Farm Security Administration. And he took this particular photo, Negro Boys, Southside, Easter Sunday, 1941. And she was struck by this particular piece. And she had done individual portraits up until this time. And when she saw this photograph, it was the first group piece that she created, and this is what she created. Now I have a close-up, a detail of the young guy with his hand under his face, and you can kind of see what she does with the stitching with his hair to create texture. One of the things that I think that Bisa does so well is how she creates the life in the eyes, and with her shading with fabric. One of the things I should mention is when you see her work, none of it is paint. It's all layered fabric, different shades. That's why she has to make a plan. It's all layers of fabric layered on top of each other to create the image. It's another one from 2018. So now she's no longer working full-time. She's teaching high school too. So she was no longer working full-time as an art teacher. So she has time to work on her own work. That was one of her first pieces. This is another one from 2018. Now this particular one, Broom Jumpers, that was based on a photo of her grandparents getting married. Some of the pieces I have, the photos that inspired her. This particular photo is a famous photo of Salika, and Salika was thought to be a circus performer. This was done in 1891 in Paris, in Nadar's studio. It's not recorded whether it was Paul or his father, Felix, but it's a very famous photo. She came across it. She liked the regal posture that particular subject presented, and she repositioned her in front of the Taj Mahal. Now this particular one, Safety Patrol 2018, this is one of the signature pieces for her exhibition, and it's also was purchased by the Art Institute of Chicago. And I have some detailed photographs. So so that you can see the detail of her stitching. It's not just the fabric she chooses, it's how she chooses to layer on and how she creates the elements. Look at the sunglasses of the young guy. Look at his eyes versus the next young man next to him, next to the girl. Their eyes are all different. Their expressions are different. Their hair is different. It's another close-up of some of the other children. Now her next photo was taken by Thomas Askew. I read an article not too long ago that said he never got his due as a photographer. He was a photographer who worked out of Atlanta, taking a lot of photos around the turn of the century. And some of the ones he took around the turn of the century were part of the Paris exhibition, the quote Negro booth that W.E.B. Du Bois manned in Paris. And this particular photo was the photo that inspired her, of these four young women on the steps. And it's at the turn of the century, these women look like they're ready to take over the world. They're wearing the modern walking skirts with the muffin sleeves so they can like walk around. They're wearing their straw hats cocked to the side. And this was a real inspiration for Butler. And now you see her rendition of it. This is called I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. And this piece is owned by Mia. It's part of the exhibition at the Art Institute of Chicago right now. And so I'm not sure when we'll see it at Mia, but it is owned by them. Each one of these young ladies has a story. Like the one on the left has the diamonds in her skirt, so she's from wealthy parents. The one next to her, moving towards your right, is engaged, and so she has all the hearts in her skirt. And the third one is the one that has the caged birds on it. But she also has fans, and in Africa, when you have fans, that means you've achieved a certain status. And the end woman has a story as well, but one of the things that Bisa does, like she got that particular piece of fabric from West Africa, and it was created after Michelle Obama paid a visit, and they called this fabric Michelle Obama shoes. And so she felt she had to use this piece of fabric in this particular instance with these young women. These are three kings. Here's the detail. This is I Am Not Your Negro. And she uses a Dorothea Lange photo as the inspiration for that. You notice the guy's straw hat is next to him. She places it on his knee. Now this particular daguerreotype, which is the first form of photography that was available in 1939 and actually introduced to New Orleans by an African-American photographer who was present when Daguerre presented it in Paris. But Samuel J. Miller was an Akron, Ohio photographer who created this picture of Frederick Douglass after he delivered his famous speech on the 4th of July. And they've taken, like, the middle part of that particular speech where he says, what does Independence Day mean to the slave? And so it's right around the time that he delivers that speech. What Bisa was surprised about was not only how young he is in this particular photo when he's delivered that speech, but how well dressed he was. She noticed the tie, she noticed the brocade vest, probably because she's a textile artist. She also was inspired by this one, like the texture of his hair, the waviness. It's a lithograph. He's got a cravat. This lithograph is around the same time. And this is the gaze that she uses in her piece. And you can kind of see she's got it hung in her studio on the right side. And you can't get the sense of how huge this is. And this particular piece is owned by the Toledo Museum. Every time people see her work, they want to know if it's available for sale, if they can buy it. Well, her pieces at one time were available for sale. However, all of her pieces she's created have been purchased. In fact, she has a back order list, and for people who want to know more about her work, they can contact her galleryist, Claire Oliver Gallery, that's in Harlem. And any prints that she's done, and she hasn't done very many, are also available from Claire Oliver. But people always ask about how they can obtain her work. She also talks about sometimes she makes fabric choices, like on Frederick, like his sleeves, that it's an ABCD fabric. You can see the sleeve better in this particular image. And in Africa, that fabric means that you're literate, you're educated. So she chose to use that. Again, the bird's the symbol of freedom. And then she chose, since Frederick Douglass was always about supporting social change, the pants are from a company that supports women that have come out of conflict, that were raped as a part of the coup taking over. And this particular organization is a refuge for these women, and they created that fabric. And so she wanted to make a statement about those women, and so she chose to use that fabric for his pants. And his vest, which you can probably see a little bit better in this photo, that fabric was from actually the state of James Porter. James Porter was one of the first African-American art historians. He taught at Howard University. And when he died, the fabric that he bought in Africa was passed on to his wife. And when his wife died, their assistant had the fabric. She saw some of Bisa's work, and she contacted her and asked her, would she like the fabric, and could she use it? And so she sent her the fabric, and she used it in the Frederick Douglass piece. To God and Truth. This is about a Morris Brown football team. Again, she based it on a photograph. She omitted the manager. Like I said, she often changes the scenes. And So she's got all of these young men. Morris Brown is another historically backed college in Atlanta, Georgia. And I should mention, many people know that Howard University is historically Black. Also, the college of our new vice president. Now, this is called Four Little Girls. And again, she's commemorating an event in history. These are the real four little girls that were killed in the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama. Many artists have done tributes to this event in history. This is the one that John Biggers did, a woodcut where you see these four girls walking towards church, and it's ominous what might happen to these girls. But she chose a scene before, but they're happy and they're laughing and they have no idea what's going to be happening. Now, this A Man's Worth, this is a fairly new piece that was done in 2020. And I chose this piece because she does a demonstration where you can see her hand underneath this piece. She's layered lots of different, she uses different silk chiffons. She uses lots of different kinds of fabrics, but you can see how she's built up this particular face of this person. And she uses tiny dots of fabric glue. She dips a straight pin in the fabric glue and uses that straight pin and just little tiny dots to affix all these tiny little pieces together to create this face. This is the T. I don't have this photo, but again, it's a photo of women after church conversing. This is Dear Mama. And you can probably notice that there's writing on the back quilting. And it's Dear Mama, I love you so much. Dear Mama, I appreciate you. And all the while it contrasts with the kind of rebellious expression that the young girl has on her face. Now, this is The Great Migration. It's a photo from Isabel Wilkerson's book, The Warmth of Summer Suns. And she's used the image of two of the people. This is one of the instances where she's used a composite of many photos, but there are two children from this photo that was used. And she used, I think, 4 or 5 different photos to complete, the people that are in this. And she changed the sons to sons, O-N as opposed to U-N. And you see the two children, the young girl with the purse, and then the young boy. And the way that she's laid this out, you see the parents on the left, the grandparents on the right, the two sisters in the middle, and the young brother at the top of the triangle. And this is what he looks like. See how she's determined the shading for his hat. And the expression on his face is exactly like it was in the photograph. Even the tilt that he has, the tie. These are the two sisters. Now, she used different kinds of material for the hair. She wanted the young girl on on the right to have fluffier hair than the one on the right. And so she used different types of fabric to create the hair. Now, this is her jumping for joy in front of the Art Institute, her first major show. She's also done some time covers. This one was the International Year of the Woman, and this one was Wangari Maathai, who was environmental worker. She founded the Green Belt movement, which reforests urban areas, and she got women to do this work. She was jailed once by Kenyan political leaders because they saw her as a threat. In 2004, she was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, and she died in 2011. When she died, there were 30 branches of her organization, and 50 million trees had been planted. And this year she did Porche Bennett-Bey. She's a community activist and social, in the fight for social justice. And she works in Kenosha, Wisconsin. I should have put that as part of the issue because she came to light when there was the police shooting. And she was named the Guardian of the Year by Time Magazine, not only for the work she does for social justice, but the other community work, everything from food shelves to children learning centers. And that is it. Gosh, I finished close to on time. Now, does anybody have any questions? Is that Allison? And Stephanie, I think you have to unmic yourself so I can hear you.
I was just clapping. But I thought this was really beautiful. I hadn't heard about a lot of these artists before, even being from Chicago, and my mom grew up on the South Side. So just really grateful to hear these stories. I'm just very struck by the eyes, as you mentioned, and I'm realizing my friend got me this piece from a street artist in New York, actually, and I have it hanging specifically because of the eyes in it, but it seems to follow some of this style. But I'm curious about that term trans real that was coined. I can't remember by which member, because I just like, especially seeing the photographs and then her rendition specifically, like how sometimes the eyes look even more alive in her quilts than they do in this photograph, which is supposed to be more real, right?
Yeah, it's about a projection of an inner spirit of life. That's part of the whole luminosity. So so it's about multidimensionality and how you reflect that life that's in that multidimensionality.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions?
I just wanted to say it's really great how much detail you showed us, because I have not seen these works in person, and although I've seen them on the internet. And so this, like you said, the luminosity, it's really interesting to see that one photo where you showed her hand underneath the pieces, because it's like glazing, you know, it's like she's using this element of glazes. And I happen to work with also materials like that, and so I was you know, kind of excited about to see that, how her process is, and her colors. I mean, she makes such amazing, stunning vibrations between very specific kind of colors, which it's very difficult to get fabrics in all these different colors. I mean, it must take a lot of time to plan how she does it, and just this specific part to reveal that to us is really important. Among all the other things, I mean, your presentation was so excellent, and there was so much detail with the photographs, showing us the photographs and how in some places she removed someone, or just some small details that she changed. It's sort of like looking at old paintings, like the pentimenti, like things that you change your mind or something. Here you're showing her using these kind of modern, as a modern contemporary artist, how she's looking at the photography, and then she's changing from that. So thank you so much. It's a really, really wonderful presentation. I really appreciate it so much.
You're welcome. She tells a story about this one woman who creates fabrics, and she lives in New Hampshire, and she creates fabrics. I had not heard of this. It's called an ice water method, and she puts fabric dye and ice in a jar with fabric, and she leaves it, and the next day she's created fabric with all of these variations of color. And this woman in New Hampshire creates this fabric, and then she sends the samples to Bisa, and she started using it. So sometimes she's used this fabric that has all of these different colors in it from these ice baths that this fabric artist has created when she creates the fabric. So it's really, really interesting what she goes through in terms of not only the contact she's made with people who create fabrics, not just like buying them from one vendor or another, and she has many vendors, but all of these various sources, some of the people who make the fabrics themselves. So it's really interesting.
That's amazing. And also, I wanted to say one more thing, because in thinking about that, what you just said, it reminded me also to comment about you sharing those details about the iconography that's on some of the different fabrics, and how she's included that and made those symbolic references as well. So the colors, and now knowing also that she's working also in direct connection with the people who are making fabrics. I mean, it's really incredible. Her work is so stunning, and it's such a lovely presentation that you've shared with all of these details. It's amazing. Thank you.
Well, thanks for coming. Any other questions?
Yes, in the video that you shared, there was a moment in, I think, in her studio where she's using some equipment. The handle, she has the handles on. Is that something that's made specifically for the large scale project she works on? And was there a video camera so she can see where the needle is? Is that what was going on with that thing?
Well, I'm not exactly sure how it works. She calls it the beast.
It's
and
Suzanne?
and originally it was made by a man who created mattresses, and he adapted it for his wife, who was a quilter. And she says
Right.
it practically takes up the entire room, but it has made her sewing in these large pieces really go very quickly. And she said it's a very expensive piece of equipment. She says it costs more than her car, but it has made her life, her father encouraged her to buy it because it's really made her life as a professional a whole lot easier. And she can do, if you noticed, and a lot of, let me go back here so I can, you notice in the background where she's stitching, all of these stitches mean something to her too. And she's stitching in these strips to kind of emulate kente cloth because her background, her father is from Ghana. And so, but she's doing it on top of this Scottish plaid because that's a part of Frederick Douglass's background as well. So even when she chooses background, everything means something. It's all a part of the story. And sometimes you don't get the whole story from just looking at it, even though it's very beautiful.
Wow, thank you for that.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
Yeah, I wanted to ask more. And you did a lot of detail, so thank you for the presentation. But I was wondering if you could talk more about that different color palette. I just love that idea and had never heard of it before. And maybe just talk more about, since that was part of her education or anything that she's kind of taken it and evolved with, or things that you know from her.
I think
about it.
that she's, as you can tell, she's expounded on it, but it's about not looking at, it's how you look at people. And when it's representational, maybe the first thing that catches your eye is the color of their skin. It's kind of about not only removing that, but adding something extra in terms of what their skin is like. And it adds a vibrancy, which not only the AfriCOBRA artists, but Bisa believes as well, is it adds an African sensibility. The brightness of the colors and the choices of the colors. She talks about her heritage is from northern Ghana, and like a lot of the kente cloth we see is predominantly yellow, but in the northern part of Ghana, it's primarily blue, which is another part of her choice, her color palette choices. But definitely you can see her influence from the AfriCOBRA people. But it's all about drawing attention away from being representative to create a different view of color, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, I love that. Thank you.
And she, the one thing that I see that she is different is, if I can go back to Jeff Donaldson. Eventually I'll get there. You can see like he uses all of the colors, but his base is on a representational color. And she started out doing that. And then she kind of grew past that, where she wanted to negate that altogether and focus on the colors. And the Art Institute of Chicago, in 2018, had a 50th anniversary of AfriCOBRA, and only three of the artists were still alive when they did that, but all of them attended the Art Institute of Chicago, so it was almost like an alumni kind of presentation. Okay. Anybody else?
Wonderful. Thank you, Suzanne, so much. You can see in the comments and the questions, it was very enthusiastically received for just a beautiful presentation and connecting us, helping us to see these, beautiful work. I'm already, going down Instagram rabbit holes now of like where else I can follow this work. So thank you so much for your time and your presentation. And so if we can give a Zoom round of applause.
Well, thank you very much. This is what I do, and I love doing it.
Well, and
So
please come back anytime as well.
Okay, well, you just let me know.
Sounds good. Thanks all. And if you see in the chat, Stephanie Pescatelli had to jump off, but she'll be presenting at next week's Arts Lunch on Helma Afklint's work. So come back for some mystical painting.
Okay, well, great. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.